I'm a sociologist, seriously. And what that means in part is that I'm interested in cultural change, trends over time. There's a couple of trends in play right now that I'm particularly interested in, and I thought it might be worth spending a little time talking about. One of them is the increase in recent years in the popularity of the pseudoscientific and the paranormal. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should probably tell you I've been interested in the paranormal and the pseudoscientific most of my life. When I was an adolescent, I was a magician. Not a very good one, but I was a magician. And the points of overlap between magic and the supernatural and the paranormal are pretty close. Actually, I had hundreds of business cards printed up with my magic name on them. My name was Marvello, which until my brother told me it sounded more like an ice cream brand than a magician's name. So I ditched it, but I was always very inspired by the work of Houdini, who I think almost everybody knows that name. And what Houdini did in the latter part of his career was he spent a great deal of his time exposing fake mediums and other sorts of charlatans who preyed upon the public by popularizing these pseudoscientific and paranormal notions. And as my own, sort of academic career was coming to a close, I thought of Houdini again, and I thought, yeah, that's good, I'll do that. So the title of the talk, as was pointed out, it includes the word snake oil. And some of you know, no doubt, that the term snake oil actually comes from the medicine shows of the 19th century. It was a term that referred to the kinds of medicines that were sold in the promise of curing maladies, which, the medicines were completely ineffective. In the contemporary period, that term is used to refer to a very wide range of paranormal and pseudoscientific beliefs and practices. Creationism, astrology, talking to the dead, homeopathy, etc. Now, most of those things, or all of those things really, share a key characteristic in common. And the key characteristic they share in common is that there really tends to be a lot less there than meets the eye. It's one thing for a believer to conclude that houses can be haunted. It's quite another to say that that conclusion is based on some substantial body of evidence. In fact, the evidence in each of those cases and in several others is really pretty negligible. One of the defining criteria, in fact, of what we think of as pseudoscience or what we think of as the paranormal is, in fact, the absence of a sort of refined, systematic body of evidence. That's not to say there's no evidence at all. If you know somebody who believes in ghosts, for example, there's almost a certainty that they can tell you an anecdote, a story, that is about something that happened to them or something that happened to a friend of theirs, and that story is somehow the basis of their belief. The problem with anecdotes is they're very unreliable. I mean, you may have heard the phrase, data is not the plural of anecdote. Well, actually, data is the plural of anecdote. The problem is that anecdotes simply don't make very good data. It's very difficult to argue with someone who claims to have seen a ghost. I've tried it on many occasions. It's very difficult, in part because we have an unmitigated faith in the inerrancy of our own perceptions. Whenever somebody tells me they've seen a ghost, I always ask them two questions just to sort of get them thinking. The first question is, I ask them if the ghost was wearing clothes. And if they answer yes to that question, then the second question I ask them is, how do they think the clothes made it into the spiritual realm? That usually takes them away to ponder the various possibilities there. Now, I don't want to expose anybody because there are television cameras here, but if this were an average audience and I asked for a show of hands, how many people in the audience believe in creationism, or think the Sasquatch is hiding in the North Woods, or think that the ancient astronauts built the pyramids, usually several hands go up. And you can tell the real true believers Because when their hands go up, they're wearing one of those. The power bracelet. Remember the power bracelet, the silicone bracelet with the mylar hologram implants? Works with the body's natural energy field in order to increase your strength and flexibility. One of the few placebos that is also a fashion accessory. Been a large number of surveys done in recent years which indicate that belief in the paranormal and in the pseudoscientific is widespread, but more importantly, that it seems to be increasing substantially over time. Now, that's led some people to conclude that maybe the paranormal is the new normal. It's interesting because it's a relatively recent development. I mean, it's not that long ago that the discussion of things like, for instance, astral projection or psychic healing would have been pretty far removed from mainstream cultural discourse. In the 1970s, the actress Shirley MacLaine was a punchline to jokes because she spoke publicly. She was a public figure who spoke openly about her belief in things like reincarnation or channeling. Topics like that didn't circulate through popular media quite as they do now. They circulated via urban legend, or they circulated via pulpy magazines with titles like Fate or 40 in Times. Can I get some water? Just that one I had over there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a long day. But it's not that way anymore, for sure. The evidence that the paranormal and the pseudoscientific have penetrated into the mainstream culture seems to be everywhere. I mean, all you have to do is put on the Unlearning channel. And I mean, the programs there are almost limitless. When Ghosts Attack, Psychic Kids, The Haunted Collector, Mysteries and Monsters in America, The Long Island Medium. All of those shows, I think, blur a line between documentary and dogma. And in so doing, they really do mislead the very large audiences who attend to those programs. They're not all that different, in a sense, from the most recent cycle of horror films, which either claim to be based on actual events, which you see at the beginning of almost every contemporary horror film, or which use the conceit of found footage in order to convince the audience that the story that they're telling is a true one. But it gets worse than that. The superstars of the paranormal and pseudoscientific world, I'm thinking of people like Teresa Caputo, when they visit the daytime network brand name talk shows like Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz or Dr. whomever, they're treated truly like visiting royalty. If you don't know who Teresa Caputo is, she's a woman who bills herself as the Long Island Medium. She claims to be able to talk to the dead. Well, actually, talking to the dead's easy. She claims the dead answer her. That's actually the more complicated trick. If you want to go see her, I don't know what the phrase would be, if the phrase would be in concert. Tickets cost you about $400. She's the Celine Dion of the spiritual world, yes, is the way to think about her. Now, it's important in a sense to ask, I mean, does any of this really matter? And a lot of people think it doesn't. They think that, embracing the pseudoscientific or the paranormal is benign, a kind of amusement, a dalliance of some sort. And maybe even it gives people comfort. I'm less convinced of that. I think there are problems there, and I think it's short-sighted not to see them. I think the problems differ in the degree to which they are apparent, but they're there nonetheless. I mean, for example, at one end of a continuum, I mean, if an untested or tested and proven ineffective alternative medicine diverts people away from forms of medical intervention which are known to be more effective, I think that's problematic. And it's hard to think about, the millions of dollars spent every year, often by those who cannot afford it, on psychics and mediums and astrological readings, etc., is really anything other than exploitation. Particularly when you consider that virtually anything a psychic can do can be done by a mediocre magician. And remember, I speak with authority because I was a mediocre magician. The other question, this question of why is it increasing over time? I honestly can't give you any sort of definitive answer to that. I think that is still, a problem in process. It's the kind of thing you might wish to discuss with colleagues over cappuccino or something. I think one part of the answer to that question, and it's an important question why it would be increasing over time. As a very wise rabbi once said, nonsense is nonsense, but the history of nonsense is a very important science. I mean, it's important to know why this kind of thing would sort of begin to capture more and more attention in the present period. I think one of the reasons is, at least in the case of some forms of pseudoscientific practice, I think there is an attraction there that is based on the greater degree of consumer friendliness associated with the practice. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you think about conventional religion, the spiritual character of conventional religion, and compare that to the spiritual character of something like astrology. In conventional religion, the individual is not the center of attention, of course. The deity who the individual worships is the center of attention. And if the individual wants something, the individual has to ask for it, beg, plead, beseech, cajole, sacrifice, whatever. If you get it, good. If you don't, that's part of the way the system works. The comedian Emo Phillips said when he was a kid, he used to always pray for a bicycle, and he never got one. He realized it didn't work that way. So he stole a bicycle, and then he prayed for forgiveness. I mean, different strategies, but he was a supplicant in both cases. If you compare that to astrology, astrology is a very different thing. In the case of astrology, you, the consumer, the person who paid for the reading, is at the center of the experience. And it's not about begging, it's about realizing that the stars and the planets, the very stars and the very planets, aligned in a particular way to make you the very special person that you are, even though that's nonsensical. Carl Sagan, the great scientist, said, if you were born in a hospital, the attending room physician exerted a stronger gravitational pull on you than any of the stars or any of the planets did. Or think about that book, The Secret, which I hope no one in the room read, but I'm afraid some did. The book, The Secret, the movie, The Secret, the calendar, The Secret, the napkins, The Secret, whatever, the whole line of goods. I mean, that book was a weird sort of combination of, the language of quantum physics and the language of the power of positive thinking. And basically, I mean, the argument there was that if you really wanted something, we didn't have to beg for it or beseech for it or make sacrifices for it. You merely had to want it, and if you wanted it sufficiently, it would be yours. Interesting. That book sold almost 20 million copies. Another place where you sort of see that consumer-friendly character, I think, is in the area of healthcare. I mean, thinking about some of the things Jonathan talked about earlier today. The careful studies that have been done, the very careful double-blind, randomized studies that have been done of things like homeopathy or acupuncture, indicate that whatever effects are associated with those practices tend to be placebo effects, and they tend to be placebo effects largely associated with the extraordinary amounts of time and attention that the practitioners spend with their patients. And I think that speaks in a sort of fundamental way, perhaps, to the, to the impersonality that many people feel characterizes the contemporary healthcare system. Now, I said at the beginning that there were a couple of trends at play here. There is another one, which I want to very quickly comment on, and that is we're not only in a period when we see the rise of pseudoscience, but we're in a period, despite some of the amazing things we heard today, a period in which we are seeing, to some degree, a decline in scientific literacy and an increase in science denialism. And the evidence of that is everywhere, too. We've seen organized campaigns resisting childhood vaccination. We've seen a denial of climate science, a denial of the science linking HIV to AIDS. On the subject of evolution, Canadians aren't as bad as Americans. Most of us accept evolution, but about 40% of us accept also the Fred Flintstone theory of history, as I like to call it, which thinks that dinosaurs and humans were alive at the same time. We've seen the end of the long-form census and all of the benefits that would have given us. We've seen the federal government dismantle a large number of important research projects. Surveys indicate that people on average don't have a great deal of faith in science, and most of us can't even name a living scientist. If that wasn't bad enough, there's also evidence to suggest that math and science scores among our students are in some decline. Now, I don't think those things are coincidental. The rise of the pseudoscientific and the decline of the scientific seem to be mutually reinforcing trends. And I think as pseudoscience enters the cultural mainstream, it brings with it some disturbing memes. And I think the most important one it brings with us is the notion that, in a sense, cold, hard facts don't really matter quite so much. And in the end, evidence is really kind of a matter of opinion. I think they underwrite the notion, that science is just one source of information among several equally viable alternatives. I don't think we can lose sight of what was said by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, academic and American senator. He said, just because everybody's entitled to their own opinion doesn't mean we're all entitled to our own facts. Where does that leave us? If it's our intention to move back to some place where evidence is the basis of public policy and of the basis of public discourse and the basis of important decisions we make in our own lives, we can't depend on the government to lead us there for reasons I've already said. It has to be a grassroots movement, right? So where's the spark? Lots of places. There's lots of things we can do. And as I said on Mission Impossible, your mission, should you choose to accept it, for example, become as informed as you can about public issues regarding science. Write to your MP or MPP and tell them that you expect evidence-based decision-making on policy questions, not wishful thinking. Write to the networks that mislead people with their presentation of the pseudoscientific and tell them you expect more from them in the future. Join a skeptical organization. Most importantly, though, the next time somebody comes along with snake oil, tell them thanks, but we're not buying it. Thank you.